Peen from Truth for Life with Alistair Begg were heard daily and weekends on Bible School Radio, 91.3 KDKR Decatur, Dallas-Fort Worth, and on 91.3 KYJC Commerce.
Portions of KDKR's daily programming do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, how to recession-proof your finances. Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon and welcome to the Prudent Money Radio Show. I'm your host, Bob Brooks. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, if we are indeed heading towards a recession or in the early stages of a recession, how do you go about preparing your finances? Crown CEO and author Chuck Bentley is here today to give us some thoughts. Chuck, always good to have you on the program.
Well, thank you, Bob. It's always my pleasure. I enjoy you and the work you do, and
thank you.
Get in to talk about the issues that matter.
Now, before we get started, I was curious how your new book, Economic Evidence for God, was being received now that you've had a little time to get it out in the media and talk about it. Tell us.
Well, thank you, Bob. It's doing very well, and particularly within the context of my own organization. We have offices and volunteers and staff around the world, and they have really begun to enjoy it and pick it up. It's now going to be translated in some other languages.
Wow.
And I do weekly updates. I'm doing one for the Middle East, actually.
Really?
I think later this week, they want to talk about economic evidence for God and look at some of the ways that we can know Him through the numbers, which you and I both enjoy on a regular basis.
You know, I will not probably get this quote just right, but my assistant, Alyssa, took a look at the book and actually read the book while I was sitting on her desk. And she said, I normally would not read a book about economics, but I couldn't put this book down. And it made so much sense to me. So that's, I think, a very nice quote there for you.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. Economics is the study of human behavior.
Yes.
We reveal what we believe, what we value, what's important to us, what we care about. As Larry Burkett used to say, we write our autobiography with the choices we make with money. And I just take that perspective and wrote about it in a commonsensical kind of way. And people do appreciate it. They do like to think about economics differently than just, the graphs and the raw numbers. Behind those numbers, there are human choices and human consequences.
So you get quite a few questions through the crown.org website. And so we like to discuss some of these questions because I always have my opinion is if someone sends a question in, there's hundreds of people who have the same question. And, of course, all we've heard about is recession here, recession there, the big debate as to whether or not we are in a recession, even though the standard definition of recession has been satisfied, which is kind of interesting. But regardless, there's some things to know, good steps to take. But let's start off with some basics. Explain what a recession is and how it impacts money, Chuck.
Well, as you said, the actual definition has been satisfied. It's 2 quarters of economic decline, and we have had that in the United States. We've had our GDP decline 2 consecutive quarters. One quarter it dropped 1.6%, the other 0.9%, not very steep, not real hard drop. But it does mean that we are going backwards in economic growth. And a recession, particularly for how it impacts money, we lose most assets lose value. For example, if you just pick real estate, supply begins to increase, demand begins to decrease, and therefore prices go down and values go down. And after just the incredible run-up we've seen in the price of real estate, we're now seeing a softening, not a major correction. Most people are losing some of that sort of high inflation impact on real estate, but that's what a recession does.
I want to bring up the, as I call them, the gloom and doom newsletter writers who send out all the sensationalized emails. and kind of scare you into subscribing to their newsletter. And they're talking a lot about the Great Depression, comparing those times to the 1920s to today. Excuse me. What would you say about these sensationalized emails and the difference between a recession and Great Depression, and even the chances of something like that happening again?
Well, I don't like making any decisions based on fear or greed.
Yes.
And that's typically what moves the market and moves people. And when you get into making those type of choices emotionally, you're in trouble. As you know, Bob, the data supports the fact that anybody who hires a financial advisor does better over the long haul than those who do not. And most of it is not simply that the advisor is smarter than the average investor, but they help them to stabilize their thinking and prevent emotional whipsaw. So I reject the doom and gloom newsletters. I reject the prognosticators of disaster. I think they're always wrong, and usually they have a motive behind those claims. They're either trying to move the market in the direction that they've placed their
Yes.
bets on the future,
Yes.
or they're trying to sell you something. But a depression is a prolonged recession. It usually is characterized by a substantial loss of employment and a loss of value in our wealth and assets. So depression is a terrible thing, but it happens very, very infrequently, only a few times in American history. And that's because we have some of the greatest, most productive workers in the world. Americans work longer and harder hours than any other culture in the whole world. We take the least time off. I'm not saying this is a good thing, Bob, but we're least likely to experience a depression because we are workers and producers, and we take it very, very seriously.
Yeah, I look at it this way: if we were able to dodge depression like scenario when COVID hit, I think we can dodge just about anything. If you think about how bad that could have turned out by the numbers. And we're fortunate enough to, I mean, not that it was not bad, because it was, but fortunately we got through it. Let's talk a little bit about some just basic recession proofing. And I don't think it really matters if we are in one, we're heading towards one. This is just the sign of the times today. These are the steps that we need to take. Just talk a little bit about it, generally speaking, then we'll dive into some details.
I look at it in two ways. One is recession-proofing your career, because that's where a lot of people are caught off guard. They don't realize they work in a career space that may be the hardest hit, such as in retail or something targeted towards consumer consumption. Those areas usually draw back quickly because that's discretionary spending. But there are careers that are more recession-proof. They're not going to go up or down as the economy changes. So you need to evaluate that. And then secondly, regardless of which career you're in, you need to recession-proof your personal finances. I like to say that's always the same. God told us how to do that. And sometimes it takes a recession or some pain to begin to want to follow God's principles. But we all have to spend less than we earn. We need to reduce debt. We need to increase our savings, have an emergency fund, reduce all of the variable expenses in our life so we can weather the storm. And we need to diversify and get good, wise counsel to manage our assets well through those storms, and then to really look to the Lord. Work with diligence, but pray, be thankful, and always trust Him, whether it's going well for you or whether it's going bad, so that you're not making emotional decisions.
You know, Chuck, I can't help but think that what a wonderful opportunity to rededicate your personal stewardship relationship with Christ. I think we often forget about that, but that is, as you talk about, that is at the foundation of everything, and is really the safest place that we can be in any type of economic situation.
Well, that's true. Is when we see ourselves as God's steward, not as a owner of the resources that are in our care, I think we're liberated from that temptation to put our identity in money. And you know your identity is in money by the way you respond to losing it. And if it wrecks you because you lost money, then you've placed your identity in it, and it was never yours in the first place. I have a friend who lost more than $1 billion in a real estate transaction. He was took it quite well, actually, and when I asked him how he adjusted to that enormous loss, he said, well, God disciplines those he loves, and he must love me very much.
So talk back up for a second and talk about this of loss and stewardship. I want to make sure that people hear this, because this is good.
Well, loss is a part of life. We lose things all the time. It's designed for everything we have is temporal. And the only things that last in life are our relationship with God and our love and investment in other people. But our homes won't last. Our companies don't last. Our so-called wealth doesn't last. The Lord said that it's all going to be gone, it's nothing is going to last that we have in our hands, nothing that's tangible. And so we have to start doing what God said and to think about things eternally. The American mindset is to get into retirement comfortably and make that last to the end of my life. But God said that's not the way to think about it. You only have one day, so think about your investments eternally and lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. The parable of the wise steward in Luke 16 is fascinating to me because God commended a shrewd steward who used money for a purpose beyond his own lifetime. He said he made friends so that when his job responsibilities were gone, he would have something of greater value. And that's repurposing the use of wealth. So that essentially, if you lose money, you haven't really lost anything that was yours. We simply steward it for a temporary time, Bob.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money radio show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Crown CEO and author Chuck Bentley is here, as he is every month, to talk a little bit about money and stewardship. And I want to make sure that you know of two things. Number one, a book you need to be reading, his latest book, Economic Evidence for God, and where you can find out more information about the book, about Chuck, and just some wonderful resources at crown.org. And Chuck, as you know, I'm a big believer in Crown, what you guys are doing, your ministry over there. And if you have an opportunity, you're part of a church, you have an opportunity to take Crown into your church and start a group, life-changing is about the only way that I can describe it. So go check that out, crown.org. I like the way that you talk about this from the standpoint of employment, because that's a big deal. In recessions, there tend to be layoffs, and we're starting to see that trickle in, and the job environment takes on a different tone. You, in talking about your employer, what are some signs? And I really like what you said in this email answer back to the person who sent you the email. What are some signs of trouble with your employer that you need to be aware of? Okay.
Well, if you're employed now and you're watching what's happening, you're paying close attention, you may notice that some layoffs are happening, or people are quietly slipping out on their own. They're signs that maybe they're not confident in the future of the organization. Or if you see the company start to cut back in hiring and spending, maybe they're freezing wages, or they're starting to discount their prices for whatever products you sell, or inventory is building up if you're in manufacturing and things aren't going out the door, or all the dreams of expansion are put on hold, then you need to be aware that possibly the company is going to have to lay off more people or maybe even close their doors, and you need to be prepared for that.
Let's talk about two employment situations, and they're the exact opposite. One, just as you described, there's some problems, you're seeing signs, you're seeing red flags, and you know that, hey, I got to get out and start talking to some people, probably going through the interview process. How different is the interview, do you think, is the interview process in a time of recession when things are not as confident, people are seeking other opportunities versus just a normal job situation where you interview. What should you expect in that interview process?
Well, I think most employers start to cut back on anything that was a little bit unnecessary, and they get down to the essentials. And what they're looking for are employees with the ability to create value. That means you're good at problem solving, you're good at business expansion skills. Maybe you've got an ability to market online or to basically be a salesperson for the organization. And if you can add value to the bottom line, then you need to be able to share that in the interview process. Most employers want to get to the heart of the matter. Obviously, you have to have character, you have to have some competency and some experience at what you're doing, but you also have to be able to communicate that in an interview setting that, yes, I'm able to do this, yes, I'm able to get that done, and I can meet the demands of the job without a lot of drama. Most employers want to get rid of stress, not have somebody that brings it with them. And I like the Jeremiah 29 principle that we go in seeking to help our employer prosper. And if we help them prosper, there's a promise that we too will prosper. So our attitude is, as an employee, what can I do to make your business better? And that will get you hired almost every time, Bob.
Sure. Yeah, and I don't think that people really think about that from creating value, but that is at the key of everything, especially when hiring is a tough process to go through anyway for an employer during times like this. You also mentioned that if a company is doing well during a recession, fortunate for the company, everything still looks okay, is probably a good idea to continue seeking opportunities to improve job skills and job security. How would an employee go about asking their employer for these opportunities?
Well, I think it's a great move to ask, are there internal training opportunities where I can get better at what I'm doing? Ask what would prepare you for a promotion in the future. We've had people come to us and say, I would like to get an MBA, or I would like to take an executive course. I would like to get better at what I'm called to do. And we always say yes. And we get excited about those people who have the internal motivation to say, I don't want to just stay still in my career here. I want to continue to add more value. And it doesn't have to cost a lot of money anymore. There's a lot of available resources online. I think that if you just start self-educating, it's a really good start, and your employer's going to notice. I take courses on Coursera. It's very popular for busy executives to be able to look at these 10-minute lectures and keep learning, because it's through education that we get more wisdom and we add more value.
We earlier on the phone, you and I were talking about the CPI numbers, the inflation numbers that came out this morning came out a little bit higher than was expected. And of course, all you have to do is, gasoline prices have come down, no question. That's a good thing. But boy, going to the grocery store week after week, you continue to see those price increases. What are some examples of some additional job opportunities that a person could seek out to supplement their income, to compensate for these higher prices?
Well, I think it's an important, actually a biblical principle, to have a diversified source of income. I think you need to be able to consider, I'm quoting directly from Solomon in Ecclesiastes 11, verse 6. He said, do something by morning and something by evening, whether it's a side gig, whether it's a side investment. I think being able to look at, during a difficult time, two things: either something where you're employed by day, full time, and something that you've started on your own, possibly consulting, possibly making some sort of investment, or simply improving your ability to add value in the future and your future income earning potential. I think that's wisdom. And Solomon recommended it. He said, because you don't know what the future holds. Yes. You really have to be prepared for any scenario.
Knowing where your money is going is absolutely critical. Let's talk about some practical steps. What advice do you have for someone who has tried budgeting in the past, now realizes I've got to get a budget set up. I've got to start the discipline of following it. Where do you even start if you haven't been doing it?
Well, there's a lot of resources. We have a program called How to Build a Budget That You Love. There's some great mobile apps out there that we recommend to people that they discover. The main thing, Bob, is to do something that becomes very purposeful for knowing where your money is going to go before it's spent. And I'm sure you talk to clients all the time that are frustrated that they don't know where their money is going and they feel like they're a little bit out of control. It only takes about 15 minutes a day to really think it through and set something up. Maybe you go to dinner with your spouse and you sit down and you have money talks. You're very intentional about your goals, about what you'd like to achieve, how much more you'd like to give, how much you'd like to be able to help the children progress in life. You talk about those things, and then you engineer it backwards. You say, okay, what are my fixed expenses? How can I reduce those where I have some margin? And how do I control my variable expenses? We've seen people do that with putting cash in envelopes quite successfully for years. And essentially, that method just becomes a digital method if you download an app. You allocate money into an envelope, and you don't spend more than what's in it. So you've got a budget for groceries and gasoline, getting your hair done, or your gym cost, whatever those are, and you know in advance that you're going to make it through the month without overspending. And that reduces your stress and increases your opportunities.
I think the bottom line is, you look out in the marketplace, there's a lot of different programs, free resources really to set up a good budget and get started. But I think what's important, and I think you would agree, that you got to find something that works for you, because if you get into something that maybe is a little too much on the technology side, you just won't use it, and that's kind of defeats the purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't use it, it's worthless to you, no matter how much you spend on it. It's very similar to a diet. You can download the diet apps, but if you don't follow it, you're not going to have very good results.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. I do appreciate it. Been talking to Crown CEO and author Chuck Bentley. Another great book that you need to check out, Economic Evidence for God. And if you want more information, go to crown.org. Chuck, as always, such a blessing to have you on the program, and we'll see you next month.
Keep up the good work, Bob. God bless you.
God bless you. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. I do appreciate it. Once again, that was Crown CEO and author Chuck Bentley. He's a Prudent Money contributor, comes on once a month, and just love talking to Chuck. He's full of such great wisdom. And if you want more information about Chuck or the book, his latest book is Economic Evidence for God, go to crown.org, and you can get more information there, plus a lot of great free resources that are available. Once again, that is crown.org. Hey, this is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. If you have a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.